Welcome to the last week of CodeSprint B. So last week, in week 4, you started working on your final projects, and this week the focus is on finishing up those final projects so that we can move into CodeSprint C, where we will take our JavaScript knowledge and start talking about server-side programming and other environments where you can bring that JavaScript knowledge. So let me switch to Canvas view here. So this week you have not a lot of required material. The only required viewing is this environment variables in deploying page, which talks about how to deploy your project, your Firebase configured project to Vercel. There are some added caveats for how we should handle projects that have credentials in them, like our Firebase API credentials. So go through that. It's 2 short videos on how to deploy. You will have to do that for your final project, and the final project page has all of the requirements for this final project. And again, one kind of reminder is with the scope of this project, it's a little bit more constrained than with CodeSprint A. So use that movie rating app that we built in weeks 3 and 4 as your guide and your template. It is okay to bring like the loading spinner and the error component along to your new project and use those components that we built, like add movie, as your guide as you build out your form for adding, whatever it is that is the content of your application. So if you do that, you will be hitting most of these milestones for your requirements already. Like the movie rating app had all of these: create, read, update, delete. The movie rating app with cloud, with React showed all of these things for handling loading and error messages. So be sure that you're referring to that to help you through your final project this week. And the more that you understand React and Firestore, the more sort of ambitious this project can be. The more you can stray from that template. But I would encourage you, if you're struggling, to stick closer to that template. Okay, so we talked about the environment variables final project. Last one here for participation for week 5 is sharing your final project. So you're going to be heading back to that progress channel, editing your post, and dropping in a link to your Vercel deploy, and specifically your production link here, the one without the hash in the URL. So that folks will always be able to check out your most recent version of your application. And this then next week we'll be able to give each other some feedback on these final projects. So these are the required bits for this week, and then there are 3 extra credit assignments. They're short, each one's pretty short, like 30-40 minutes. This one is on how to take a class component and convert it to a functional component. So a lot of you in building your final projects looked up tutorials and looked up other resources to build more advanced components in your projects. And a lot of those tutorials are in the old way of writing components, which is this class-based way. And so I show you how to take a few common class components and turn them into functional components. This one, which will be really helpful for many of you who are doing different types of data, like geo points or date times in your database. This video goes through storing all of the different types of data that are possible in Firestore, and then some of what happens when you try to retrieve those from Firestore. And then this last one is more kind of coding techniques, is how to modularize your code. And the idea here in this video is how can we take a component that has a lot of like database logic in it, as well as rendering logic, and split those out into 2 separate files that are more modular using something called custom React hooks. So that's all the material for this week. A couple of caveats before I wrap this up is talking about the final project. There are a few things that I've given you feedback on your week 3 assignment where you did your data plan. So User accounts, don't worry about them in the context of this project. Those are things that we will talk about in CodeSprint C. You can tackle them if you want, and you can reach out if you want help tackling those things, but those are not required. We'll talk about security in CodeSprint C along with user accounts. So right now our database is set up so that anyone can connect to it and add entries and edit entries, and that's fine for where we are now. We're building test apps. So once we get talking about security, we'll talk, and user accounts will be able to say like, oh, only someone who's logged in is allowed to edit this, or only someone who's logged in is allowed to edit their own data. So we'll get to that. Don't worry about that for this version of your project. And then the last one is images. So some folks had the idea that they want to upload images to Firestore, and that is something that is a little bit more advanced. And if you want to tackle that, you can reach out and talk to me about that. But it is something that sort of adding images to Firestore is not really how you're intended to use Firestore. There's another place you want to store those large files, which is cloud storage, and then you just put the URL into your database. So reach out if you want to talk about accounts or security or images in your final projects, but those are caveats to keep in mind. Like, don't try and build these into your final projects unless you actually want to tackle those as a challenge. Okay, so that's it with week C. I will encourage you, reach out early with your questions. I have office hours during the week, regular office hours on Wednesday and Friday. You can also email me to try and find a time outside of those regular hours to meet. But other than that, I will see you at the optional meeting on Friday.